Welcome back. We're halfway through the course, and I think you've come a remarkably long way in a very short time. Think about what we've covered. Early on, we learned the history of decipherment of hieroglyphs, the alphabet, and then biliteral signs. We also accumulated a sizable vocabulary and learned some basic rules about how to use those words. We now know that the verb comes first in sentences, and we know how suffix pronouns can be added to both verbs and nouns. We also have quite a few adjectives and know how to use them. That's quite a bit for only 12 lectures. Well done. In the next 12 lectures, we will steadily move towards our goal of being able to translate actual inscriptions on Egyptian temples and objects. As a matter of fact, most of the last 5 lectures in the course will be devoted to actual translations, including objects from Tutankhamun's tomb. Along the way, we'll learn a few grammar rules and fill in some vocabulary that we'll need for our translations. I'll go slowly so you can absorb it all. It shouldn't be a chore. Hieroglyphs should be fun. We will have homework to make sure you don't get lost. As always, practice is what's crucial. With that said, let's go over our homework to make sure everyone understands the past tense and adjectives. We learned quite a bit last time. The first part of the homework dealt with past tense. Our first sentence was, she rejoiced when she saw his face. We start with our verb, rejoice, which is resh. Now, for she, we add the folded cloth pronoun. But that's just, she rejoices. To make it past tense, we insert the water sign N between the verb and the pronoun. And that gives us, she rejoiced. Now, we have a compound sentence. The when is understood. So we next need, she saw his face. Ma'ah is to see. We add the folded cloth and insert the N for past tense between the verb and subject. Now, all we need is his face. We can use the ideogram for face and now add the horned viper for his. And that gives us the complete compound sentence, she rejoiced when she saw his face. Good. Our next sentence was, the town was miserable when the river was empty of water. Well, the word for miserable is the same word as bad, bin. Remember that the little bird determinative tells you that the things are not so good, like in the phrase poor man that we learned a while back. So we have miserable. Since it's at the beginning of the sentence, we can tell it's a predicate adjective, which functions like a verb. We know the hieroglyph for town, it's the crossroads. That's the town is miserable. We just need to insert the N for the past tense. So that's the town was miserable. When is understood. So next, we need our adjective, empty, shu. Again, it's being used as a predicate adjective, so it comes at the front of the phrase like a verb. Now we add river, it's ru. The last thing is to insert the N for past tense. I think by now the past tense is getting familiar. Let's do our last sentence. They sent the beer to their father. We start with the verb, hab, to send. Since they are sending, we need the suffix pronoun for they, which is sen. Last, we insert the N for the past tense. So we have they sent. Let's add the beer, heket. Now it's to their father, so we need the to for persons, which is our water hieroglyph. Next, we need father. Remember, the horned viper is silent, so father is pronounced it. Last, we add the suffix pronoun for their, sen, and we have it. They sent the beer to their father. Good. You're doing well. Now let's look at the homework sentences that used adjectives, starting with the long, difficult one that's a maxim. My suggestion was that you break it into words and then try to figure out its meaning. So let's do that. Well, what's our first word? Yes, it's nefer, which means happy, good, or beautiful. Now, where does the next word end? Yes, after the man hieroglyph, the word is sa and means son. So far, so good. What's next? Yes, we all recognize sejim, to hear, and that ends with the owl, which is the phonetic complement for the triliteral ear. So we have hear or listen. What's next? Yes, the suffix pronoun he. Next word? A little tricky. We don't want to get confused. Does the N go with the reed as some kind of particle we're not remembering? These are the kinds of things a beginning student of hieroglyphs encounters. The uncertainty can be resolved by looking further into the sentence. What's after the water sign? Is there a word we recognize? Yes, it's father, the reed, loaf, viper, and the man determinative. So the N is by itself and must be two. That makes sense because the water sign is for people and father is a person. Follows it. Well, we're doing fine. We'll figure out the meaning later. Let's continue breaking it into words. Next. Looks like the verb to be, followed by a viper, which is our suffix pronoun for he. Okay. Now we have an M, the owl. That could mean many things. From, in. It could also be the M of predication. Let's remember these possibilities for the M and move on. The next word is child, and it ends with the determinative of the child with his finger to his mouth. It was pronounced chered. What's next? It looks like the arm with a cone of incense in the hand, pronounced D, meaning to give or place. What follows this verb? The suffix pronoun horned viper, so it must be he. We're doing fine. Okay, what's our next word? Secher, plan or counsel. And that ends with the papyrus roll determinative because a plan or advice is often written. What's our next word? Yes, pen, for this. And it makes sense because counsel is masculine and pen is the masculine form. Next, we have another owl. So again, it could be lots of things, in, from, and so on. We'll pick the best one later. It's enough to know for now that the owl is a standalone word. What's next? Well, it looks like the heart ideogram. There's a stroke with it, so we can be pretty sure that the word is heart. It's followed by a suffix pronoun viper. Since it's attached to a noun, and thus almost certainly possessive, it looks like it'll be his heart. Now we have a verb coming up. Secha, to remember. And it ends with the determinative of the man with his hand to his mouth. After the verb, we have the old familiar horned viper suffix pronoun. So it must be he. Now it gets interesting. What's going on here? Well, it looks like we have a dependent pronoun, su, which is he or it. Now, what's happening with the sun and the neb basket biliteral? The difficult thing is the sun. It's clearly an ideogram. It has the stroke. So the first thing that comes to mind is sun. That's the most obvious interpretation. But we have to remember that the sun with a stroke can also mean day, because the sun determines a day. But what's with the neb? It means all or every, and with a man determinative, it's Lord. But we don't have the man, so it's going to be all or every. So it's probably going to be every day rather than every sun. The next three hieroglyphs look familiar. They're very close to mech, behold, with the hoop in the hand. It's the same thing. It means behold. It's just a variant. The loaf and quail chick combination is familiar to us. Often, it's how we form the passive voice. It's also the impersonal pronoun one. We'll see which it is later. Next, we have our verb, to say or speak. Now that's followed by another loaf and quail chick. Curious. We'll see. Anyway, the phrase would have been pronounced dejet too. Next is the mouth hieroglyph, and that normally means to with respect to places. It also means with respect to or concerning, and we will have to remember that. Next is a suffix pronoun. That probably means him. Normally, we might expect a dependent pronoun for him. But there's considerable variation in ancient Egyptian. Don't worry about it. Okay, on with it. What's our next word? It's the adjective shu, free. But it's being used as a predicate adjective. Now, we have a dependent he, so what is the owl doing? Again, it could be of, from, in, all kinds of things. We'll pick the best meaning later. For now, we're just breaking our sentence into words. Next word? It's ju, and it ends with a little bird determinative and means evil. Only one word to go. The neb basket is all or every. For some reason, I don't know why, but evil is treated as a feminine here, thus the two loaves. Well, we did it. We broke it into words. Now we'll get the overall meaning. It's going to be several sentences, so we'll now try for individual sentences and get their meanings. We already have most of the words penciled in. Okay, first sentence. Well, it starts with a predicate adjective, happy or good. Because the subject is a sun, S-O-N, it probably won't be beautiful. So it's going to be something like, the sun is good. That's a sentence. What comes next? He listens to his father. That's another sentence. And we're sure of that because it's followed by a verb, is. We can see it's he is because we have a viper suffix. Now the problem is the owl. What's it doing? What follows is the word for child. The in or of or from meanings don't make sense here. So the owl is probably the M of predication. We do have two things that could be equal on either side of the owl, he and child. If we insert an implied when, it makes sense. When he was a child, or as a child. Next, we have the verb to give or place. Let's go with place for now. We have our viper again. So he places something. What does he place? The next word is counsel or plan, and it's followed by this. So he places this counsel where? Yes, in his heart. I think we have the correct translation of this sentence. As a child, he places this counsel in his heart. The real question is, to what does the this, counsel or advice, refer? What came before in the sentence that it could refer to? I've been giving this sentence to my students for decades, and every time we get good discussion, different interpretations because it's ambiguous. Let me give you what has evolved as the most likely translation. The advice or counsel must be at the beginning of the sentence. Put it in quotations like a maxim, and it'll make sense. The son is good who listens to his father, in quotes. That's the counsel or advice. Next, we're told, as a child, he places this counsel in his heart. Now for our next sentence. Okay, he remembers it every day. Next, we have our behold. Then comes difficulty. We have the phrase with the loaf and quail chick repeated twice. We know the loaf quail chick is either passive voice or the impersonal pronoun one. I think it's probably the impersonal pronoun both times. Remember that after behold, we sometimes get the impersonal pronoun, as in behold you. That's the first use in our sentence. The verb is to say. So the to, the loaf, quail chick, following it, makes it one says, or it is said. Now, what follows this is a mouth and a viper. It could be his mouth, but that doesn't make much sense. Besides, if it meant mouth, it would probably have a stroke. The R is the question, the mouth. It could mean to, but it should be to a place. The water sign is the to for people. The mouth sign does mean with respect to, and that might work. Thus, the beginning of the sentence might be, behold, one says of him. And now, what should follow is what is said of this good boy who listens to his father. Well, what is it? We have another predicate adjective, followed by a dependent pronoun. The predicate adjective is shu, to be free. And the dependent pronoun is he. So, he is free. But of what? Well, the next word is evil, Jew. And it's followed by our neb sign, which is all. Note that it has a loaf T because for some reason the evil is being treated as a feminine. So, he is free of all evil. Now it's time to put this all together so it reads smoothly and makes good sense. It's a difficult phrase. It is a good son who listens to his father. As a child, he places this advice in his heart. He remembers it every day. Behold, one says of him, he is free of every evil. Well, that's quite a mouthful with some ambiguities, but it's the real deal. It's an ancient Egyptian maxim. I think you're doing very well. We had one more sentence, and I bet you found it easier. Of course, we start with our verb, hab, to send. Next is the suffix pronoun for they. So, they send. What do they send? The boat, the depot. Next is the mouth to, so the boat is being sent to a place. And the place is? Yes, the city. Next is another verb, ja, to ferry across. Who's ferrying across? He is. Next, we have a dependent pronoun, you, chu. So he is going to ferry you across. Next is our im, the reed and the owl. That means in or therein. And then we have a suffix pronoun. The folded cloth, which is she, her, or it. Given that we're talking about a boat, the feminine form of it makes sense because it refers to depot, boat, which is feminine. So the whole thing would make sense as, they send the boat to the city so that he may ferry you across in it. I'm inserting the so that to make it smooth. That's it. Pretty good. Isn't it fun doing real sentences? Well, now let's fill in one of the pieces that we will need for future translations. You already have quite a bit of vocabulary, and some of those words are ideograms. You all remember, ideograms are those hieroglyphs that are pictures of what they mean. We've already seen quite a few. Let me show you a few more. The good news is that you don't have to memorize them. For most, you'll know what they are once you look at them. There are lots of ideograms for people. Here's the one for man. We've seen it. And similarly, here's the one for woman. The one for child is neat. He has his finger to his mouth. He's sucking on his finger. We've already seen this as a determinative for the word for child. We just have to remember it can appear by itself and will mean child. Ancient Egyptian craftsmen produced thousands of bronze statues of Horus as a child that are practically the hieroglyph. Horus is the archetype for child. He was hidden in the marshes and protected by his mother, Isis, when Set was looking for him. But even as a child, Horus was a god. This youthful god was called Hor-Pa-Chered, Horus the child. Sometimes the hieroglyphs of gods can tell us something about ancient Egyptian thought. Let's look at the ideogram for sun. It's important and sometimes a bit confusing. In past lectures, we've seen two versions of the full word for sun. One is where it means the solar disk, and one is where it means the sun god Re. This one indicates the solar disk, while another one is the sun god. But we must remember that the disk alone has several meanings as an ideogram, including day, sun, and Re. So it can be ambiguous. The difference between the two words, when they're spelled out, shows us something about ancient Egyptian religion. The Egyptians did not view the fiery globe in the sky as a god. They wrote that differently from the name of the sun god. The sun was associated with a god, but not the god itself. This is important. There's a similar misconception about the Egyptians' regard for animals. For the most part, the Egyptians didn't worship animals. For example, they worshipped a goddess named Bastet, who was often depicted as a woman with a cat's head. But this doesn't mean that the ordinary cat in the street was worshipped. Cats were viewed as ordinary animals, just as we view them today. As a matter of fact, the Egyptians raised cats to be sacrificed as offerings to the gods. Underground catacombs at Saqqara hold hundreds of thousands of mummified cats that were killed to be offerings. When we x-ray these cats, we see two similarities among them. First, they're all about 1 year of age. They were raised till they were past kitten stage, so they would be large enough to be fitting offerings to the gods. Second, they all met violent ends. When we x-ray them, we find that their necks have been wrung. Vertebrae in their necks are disarticulated. So they certainly weren't worshipped. So, just as the sun in the sky wasn't worshipped, animals weren't either. Now, with that said, let me show you a couple of more ideograms related to gods. The next one is part of a god. It's the Deged pillar. It's not easy to see immediately what it represents. So let me give you a clue. Think skeletal. Yes, it's the backbone. Those are stylized vertebrae. It all goes back to the myth of Isis and Osiris. Remember how Isis and Osiris taught Egypt's civilization? But they were always contending with their evil brother Set. Set is a formidable opponent and eventually tricks Osiris into the wooden chest where he dies. The chest is thrown into the Nile and swept all the way to Byblos, where it comes to rest in a huge tree. As the tree grows, its trunk encompasses the chest. Well, the king of Byblos is building the palace, and he cuts down the tree for a pillar. So now we have Osiris inside a chest in a pillar in a palace. Eventually, Isis recovers the body of her husband and brings it back to Egypt for burial. But Set finds it and hacks Osiris into 14 pieces. Well, this is not just any backbone. This is one of the 14 pieces. It's the backbone of Osiris. It represents stability because our spine gives us stability to the body. You will even see the hieroglyph in Egyptian art. For example, at Seti's temple at Abydos, there's a famous scene of the pharaoh raising a giant djed pillar. Another ideogram that's important for temples is the flagpole. Most Egyptian temples had several flagpoles in front, flying banners with the god's name or symbol on them. Thus, the flagpole became the ideogram for God. It was pronounced Necher. The plural was written with 3 flagpoles and was pronounced Necheru. We've never found a banner from a flagpole. But when you visit almost any ancient Egyptian temple, you will see 4 recesses in the temple's first gateway where the flagpoles were. Okay, one last ideogram that appears in prayers, and it shows up in other interesting places too. It's a staff of authority, a scepter, and was pronounced was. The top is a ram's head. The god Amun was often depicted as ram-headed. And the bottom of the scepter is the cloven hoof of a ram. It was often held by the gods. When we see the staff by itself, it represents power. Let me show you the was scepter in another context and see if you can figure out how the word was pronounced and what it meant. Well, how would you pronounce the word? We have our was scepter, but with a T at the end. So it's wasset. But we also have a town determinative, the crossroads. So it's a city called Wasset. That was the ancient Egyptian name for Luxor. It was a place of great power where Amun, the ram-headed god, was very important. Wasset actually had 3 different names through history. First, in ancient Egyptian times, it was Wasset. Then, when the Greeks saw it, they felt it reminded them of their city, Thebes, and Homer called it 100-gated Thebes, referring to the temple entrances. Throughout antiquity, Thebes stuck as the name for the city. Later, in the 7th century, when the Arabs invaded Egypt and saw all the temples, they thought they were palaces and called the city Al-Uqsur, the Arab word for the palaces. We say Luxor. Since we're talking about a seemingly endless number of temples, let me give you one more ideogram that's relevant. It's a lizard, pronounced Esha. It means plentiful, rich, or many. I guess there were lots of lizards in Egypt. That's enough ideograms for today. We'll see more. Let's just add a few more vocabulary words to our dictionaries that we'll need for the homework translations. This was pronounced something like ehe, and the feet gives us a clue to the meaning. The word means to stand up or arise. The first hieroglyph is the mast of a ship, and is a triliteral for eh. So the arm hieroglyph is a phonetic complement. The etymology of the word probably comes from the fact that a mast is upright. So to say stand up, you just add feet. Here's our next word. It was pronounced cha and means to appear or shine. One of the sons of Ramses the Great was named Cha-em-Wasset. Can you figure out what his name means? We have the cha, so we just have to get the wasset. All you need is the M or owl. Yes, shining in Thebes. Now, let me give you a few homework sentences using everything we've been learning. Let's do English to hieroglyphs first. First one, evil is on every road. And then let's try, we will stand up and speak to our good Lord. Now a couple of hieroglyphic sentences to translate. Here they are. Now, that's enough homework for today, because I don't want to overburden you. We will have to let what we've learned sink in. Do your homework, and I'll see you next time.